Hey everyone, welcome to the Mental Playbook with Christine Dalgity. We're here to chat about all things mental health, share some awesome stories, educate, and advocate to break stigmas and gain power through knowledge for all ages and walks of life, and give you the tools you need to boost your mental game. So grab a coffee, get comfy, tune in, get inspired, and let's dive into some fascinating conversations. Remember, your mind is super powerful, and with the right tools and knowledge, you can master your mental playbook. And while you're doing that, take care of you. The topic today is narcissism, and with that, there may be some triggering words that we use as abuse is associated with it, as well as victim. If these words are triggering to you, please watch with caution or skip over this episode. If you'd like to learn more about it and understand what may be happening in your world, then please stay with us. Hey everyone, Christine here, and welcome back to another episode of the Mental Playbook with Christine Dalgity. Today we're going to talk about one of the most complex and exhausting relational dynamics, and that is living or working with somebody with narcissistic traits. You might be confused, hurt, or doubting yourself. You might wonder, this is so common, you might wonder, is it me? Am I the one creating this? Let me tell you right now, it's not. And you are not alone. So I want to first talk about what narcissism really is. Narcissism, that word is thrown around so much. And I think partly because society today is a very egocentric society. We see on social media, and I think social media is a cause of it somewhat too, but the people that are all about themselves and the Karens of the world and people that put themselves into other people's business, lives, how things are affecting them. So I hear the word narcissism in my office every day for sure, multiple times a day, and in my personal life as well. So I wanted to talk about what narcissism really is, just to start this off. So narcissism exists on a spectrum. Some traits like confidence or a desire of recognition can be healthy. Just because you have confidence in yourself doesn't make you a narcissist. Just because you might build yourself up or say positive qualities that you have doesn't make you a narcissist. When those traits are rooted in entitlement, lack of empathy, and a need to dominate, then we're starting to enter a territory of narcissistic personality disorder. Yes, narcissism, true narcissism, is a diagnosable disorder, a personality disorder. Narcissists can appear charming and confident at first. That's usually how they kind of get you in, and they appear understanding and open to what you're saying, and then down the road, once they have you, they'll often use that stuff against you. So they do start charming and confident, but that charm quickly becomes control. They use the information to control you. Narcissism is a psychological concept that refers to excessive self-focus, often at the expense of others, the emotions of others, at the expense of empathy for others. It exists, like I said, on a spectrum. So from occasional self-centeredness or self-centered behavior to a diagnosable mental health condition that I had mentioned, narcissistic personality disorder. So I'm actually going to just say NPD from now on, just to simplify things. I want you to listen to the core traits of narcissism. Again, it's a spectrum, right? Not everybody that, dominates a conversation is a narcissist. Some of the core traits: inflated sense of self-importance, constant need for admiration and validation, difficulty recognizing or caring about others' feelings, sensitivity to criticism, often reacting with anger or defensiveness. So as soon as I read that, I thought of some people that I know, clients and in my personal life, that are going to say, I have sensitivity to criticism. Am I a narcissist? Social anxiety also has sensitivity to criticism, even constructive criticism. That doesn't make you a narcissist if you have that sensitivity. It's the, anger and strong defensiveness that comes after it. You try, if you perceive criticism when you're a narcissist, you will trample all over that person. Fantasies about success, power, beauty, or ideal love. Again, everyone may dream about being successful, whatever that success means to you. They might dream of finding that perfect person for them. That doesn't make you a narcissist. It is this grandiose success, beauty, perfection of what you perceive it to be, this ideal love. So think grandiose in those terms. So if we're going to compare narcissism to NPD, narcissistic traits can show up in anyone occasionally. I think every person on this planet has moments where there's like a narcissistic trait, right? Where we kind of think about, well, how does that impact me? Or have that self-importance, or make things about ourselves, want attention maybe, bragging, that kind of stuff. NPD is more severe. So think of the spectrum, narcissistic traits, NPD. For those on Spotify, I'm gesturing, so it's like low end narcissistic traits. Not saying that narcissistic traits don't impact people or harm people, but in the spectrum, and NPD would be at the far end of the spectrum. It's more severe. It's a persistent pattern. So it's not a one-off. It's a persistent pattern that affects relationships, work, and emotional regulation. Anger, sometimes violence, is often associated with NPD. Often in session, because of this spectrum and because NPD is a diagnostic or a diagnosable condition, when clients are talking about family members, partners, colleagues, friends, whatever they're talking about, when they say narcissist, I don't use the term narcissist. I say narcissistic behavior or narcissistic traits, a person with those, because saying somebody is a narcissist straight out could imply that I'm diagnosing them. So there's two types of narcissists or narcissism that I want to talk about. And again, spectrum, right? On either end, pendulum swinging. So the first one is grandiose narcissism or overt narcissism. And that is that bold, dominant, often elitist type. That's kind of the one that we think about all the time. If I say to you, if I use the term narcissist, you're probably thinking of this person as kind of like posturing and grandiose, right? The other is vulnerable narcissism or covert narcissism. This one's probably much more difficult to deal with than overt because it's much more subtle. And that is insecure, sensitive, and approval seeking. And I'm going to expand on both of these a little bit so that you'll be able to see why covert can be so difficult to live with, to manage in someone else, of course. So overt or grandiose narcissism, like I said, that's the more recognizable, the dramatic form of narcissistic behavior. People with overt narcissistic traits tend to be bold, attention-seeking, and openly self-centered. Like you can look at them and go, wow, yeah, narcissistic behavior. There are 6 key traits to overt narcissism. So I really want you to listen to these, and so that you're able to recognize them in a partner, in other people, so that you can, I'm going to talk about how to manage. I'm going to talk about narcissistic abuse too, so that you can identify some of this, because sometimes we get wrapped up in it and it's like, whoa, right? So the 6 key traits of overt or grandiose narcissism, the typical narcissism that people think of, is grandiosity. They believe they're exceptional and superior to others. And often they will only surround themselves by people that they think are exceptional and superior, elitist, right? They have a need for admiration. They are constantly seeking praise and validation. And they lack empathy. Narcissism can, I don't want to say that they are sociopaths, although often they are, or they have sociopathic tendencies. That lack of empathy, it's so much about them that they struggle to genuinely care about other people's feelings. They don't care if they hurt you. They don't care if you do without or others do without, as long as they get what they want and they are above others. There's a dominating behavior. So they often monopolize conversations and they dismiss others' opinions. So you may be having a conversation with them. They will monopolize it. It'll be about them, their opinion. And if you have an opinion, they're like, meh, okay. And then they keep talking about their opinion. Or they invalidate your opinion right out as well. They have entitlement. I think that is one that people see the most, right? Or recognize the most, because that's what we think of with narcissism. But they expect special treatment. They expect it. If they go into a restaurant, if they just in a relationship, they expect special treatment. And if they don't get it, they can become very angry and abusive. And they tend to exploit people. They use others to achieve their own goals. So, some of those ladder climbers, or not saying that someone that is climbing the ladder in a business or a corporation is a narcissist, but they use other people to get what they want. And because they lack empathy, it doesn't bother them. They don't care. They got what they want. It made them happy. So overt narcissists can be charismatic. They can be very persuasive. That charm that they have really brings people in. One of my clients who was able to get out of a narcissistic relationship, she kind of described it like the person that she had been with. She described it like he's kind of, if you think about a party, right? And she may have gotten this from something that she watched or listened to. Sorry, I can't remember if it was her, like she told me specifically, or if she got this information, but she said it's like at a party or something. She said, if you think of like the wilderness, like the predator, and he kind of stands, or she stands there and she observes, right? And looks for the prey, looks for the one that seems overgiving or very attentive, hand on the shoulder, listening to people, interacting, giving of themselves. And it's like they kind of look, and it's like this radar just zones in. That's someone I can use. That's somebody that will build me up. That's somebody who will give me what I need. I can exploit that. And then with the lack of empathy, they don't care. This entitlement, this persuasiveness, how they persuade, and the charisma that they have gets them what they want, but often leaves people feeling drained, dismissed, emotionally drained, physically drained too. And then we have covert narcissism. So really listen up here, because this one often gets missed, because we call it victim narcissism or vulnerable narcissism. So victim kind of gave it away, right? They play the victim. It is much more subtle, and it's a more hidden form of narcissism or narcissistic personality traits. So unlike overt, where it's loud, attention-seeking behavior, covert narcissists appear shy. They appear sensitive. They appear giving. Even self-effacing. So self-effacing means they seem like, no, I don't want the attention. I don't want that 15 minutes of fame. But beneath that exterior lies a deep need for admiration and a lack of genuine empathy. So you can understand how that's really hard to navigate as somebody in that relationship. You think that they're shy and sensitive and they're like, oh, okay. And you're trying to be, give them what they need. And underneath it, they don't care. They're going to appear that way to get what they want. So the 6 key traits of a covert narcissist: passive-aggressive behavior. Overt is out there, right? Covert it's this passive-aggressive. They may express anger or resentment, but it's in indirect ways. The victim mentality that they have. They often will portray themselves as, misunderstood or mistreated. In my experience, not that I have many clients with narcissistic traits or NPD, because most people who are narcissistic don't come to therapy because either they don't need it, they're above it, or it's because if everyone else changed, if everyone else would smarten up, then I'd be okay. But in my experience, ones that I have had, the covert is often, I bet you haven't had clients that have been treated the way I have, right? I bet you've never experienced clients that have to deal with all the stuff that I have to deal with, those kinds of things. And right away, it's a ding, 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 that there's some narcissism, covert narcissism going on in there for me, because nobody else could possibly have more to deal with other people's nonsense than them. And I could not possibly have experienced that in my career. There's a sensitivity to criticism. So even mild feedback, so just mild, like, oh, maybe if you put the dishes in this cupboard, will trigger a defensiveness, and usually it's withdrawal. So they'll just walk away from you, they'll ignore you. There's also a false humility that happens. So they may downplay their achievements so that you will praise them because they're craving that praise. So if they do something, it's like, I could have done better, so that you will say, no, you're a rock star. They don't actually think, I could have done better. They want you to praise them. They want you to build them up. They want you to recognize how amazing they are. Emotional manipulation. So using guilt or gaslighting, just subtle control tactics. So I have a lot of clients who were raised by narcissistic parents, and every one of them were raised through guilt. And so they feel guilt all the time. If they, are assertive with their needs, if they need to do something for themselves, if something breaks, if, they feel guilty, like they feel responsible. And that is what covert narcissism, that's that gaslighting, the emotional manipulation that happens so that the person gets what they want. There's social withdrawal. So they'll tend to avoid the spotlight, but they want the recognition. We call it covert, obviously, obvious reasons, when I just explained overt and then covert. The narcissistic traits like entitlement, envy, lack of empathy, they're still present. So in both of the narcissistic types, those things are still present, but they're masked by behaviors that appear modest or insecure. So they appear insecure, so people will constantly build them up, but also that insecurity brings people in and gets people to do more for them too. When I just explained covert, you can hopefully understand why covert narcissism is harder to detect than overt narcissism, and the lasting impact that it can have on a person is often more emotionally draining than overt, and messes with you psychologically more because this person appears insecure and you often appear like you're a bully, or you think, am I the narcissist? Right? And I'm going to talk about that in a second. So one thing I want to really clarify though is that, and I said it, there's a spectrum. Not all narcissistic behavior is a disorder. You have to have, to have MPD, you have to meet criteria in the DSM-5, a certain number of traits to have it. So somebody could have narcissistic traits, but it not be a disorder. I just want to put that out there because how we use narcissism so much, right? So some signs that you may be dealing with a narcissist or someone with narcissistic behavior. These are patterns that I see most often in the clients that I treat that are in these relationships. Conversations that always circle back to them. Again, I want you to take these, everything that I'm saying, because the reason I keep saying this is because I have people that will take one thing and say, oh, they're a narcissist. I want you to take it in context of the person that you're dealing with. If somebody will, if you're having a conversation with somebody and they're like, oh yeah, that happened to me, and they're using it as a context to validate you, that doesn't make them a narcissist. It's a consistent pattern, right? So if every time you're having a conversation with this person, they circle back to them and they disregard what you're saying about you or what you're going through, that is a narcissistic trait. Your accomplishments are being minimized or ignored. So you may be doing stuff and, oh yeah, but then their accomplishments they're more important, or if it's a covert narcissist, it might be, why are you throwing that in my face? Are you trying to make me feel bad because I couldn't do it? Those types of things. So it's either I'm better or why are you doing this to me? Not, wow, good for you. Guilt tripping or emotional manipulation. I just talked about that a little bit. But if you see somebody guilt tripping you all the time or using that emotional manipulation to get what they want, to make you feel a certain way so that they come out on top or they are the victim, that kind of thing, that is a sign. Love bombing followed by withdrawal. And I'm going to talk, that leads to trauma bonding, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. But that love bombing, I've never met anyone like you. You are the best. You are perfect. I can't believe I met you. All of these things. And then withdrawal. That's kind of beginning of a relationship. But during long-term relationships, it could be the love bombing where all of a sudden you come up and let's go on a date and let's do this and let's do that and you're my everything and I can't believe, I don't know what I did to deserve you and all of these things. And then they get you here and then they withdraw the affection. They withdraw the attention they give you. And gaslighting. So gaslighting is any time that person's behavior or words makes you feel like you're doubting your reality. A lot of people think that gaslighting is, somebody saying, no, that didn't happen. And yeah, that is. But it's also any time, like withdrawing the attention is a form of gaslighting. Ghosting somebody is a form of gaslighting because that person is like, what did I do? Did I say the wrong thing? They start to replay the last conversation. Did I offend them? Did I say the wrong thing? So that is a form of gaslighting. So anything, stonewalling somebody, can be one. Anything that makes that other person doubt the reality of the situation. It usually turns into self-blame as well. Another one that I hear often, and it's funny because other therapists that I talk to are like, then, right? Is when my client is in a narcissistic relationship and they say to me, do you think I'm a narcissist? Do you think I'm abusive? Right away, I'm like, well, first of all, people that are true narcissists do not think that they're narcissists, right? So if you ask if you're one, usually you're not. I have had, narcissists in session ask me if they're narcissists because other people have told them they were and they wanted to clarify that they weren't, right? It wasn't am I? I hope not. It was do you think I am? Because they said it and I'm not, right? So that's different. What happens in relationships with people that are narcissistic is that we start to think that we're the narcissist. Usually they tell us we are. They will tell us that we're abusive because they push you to a point where you might lose it, right? You may yell, you might get really upset and emotional, and then they say, whoa, calm down, you're abusive. Or you'll try to be like, this is what you're doing to me. And they'll say, wow, narcissist, you're making it all about yourself. So they switch it around, and that's gaslighting too, right? But that is a question. If you are saying to yourself, you're in this type of relationship and it is causing you to ask yourself, am I abusive? Am I a narcissist? And clearly, if you look at the facts, you're not, then chances are you're with somebody who has narcissistic traits. If they're always saying it and their behavior pushes you to a point and then they say that to you, you're most likely in that type of relationship. I've had clients say to me, as we're talking about these relationships that they're in, they'll say to me, why do I feel so drained? Like I have no energy, my emotion, I'm so drained. Narcissists thrive on emotional extraction. If they can see that they're taking all from you, that actually fuels them. And you may feel like you are constantly giving to the relationship, and all you are receiving in return is criticism. They're extracting that emotion. So this is getting to trauma bonding. I want to talk a little bit about trauma bonding. Trauma bonding is not two people that have trauma and they're bonding over the trauma. That's not what trauma bonding is. Trauma bonding is intermittent reward and punishment. It creates a psychological attachment. And the result is that you stay because you're hoping for change. You stay doubting yourself. And you stay while slowly disappearing. Trauma bonding is this psychological phenomenon where a person forms a strong attachment to their abuser, essentially, but they form a strong emotional attachment to someone who is harming them. And like I said, it's often in the context of an abusive relationship. And it's not about bonding over trauma, it's about bonding over that cycle of abuse. I often talk about the cycle of abuse with clients, and I'll start at the top of a circle, and I'm going to talk about it now, but I'll show, how it's like the peak of it, and you're going to leave the abuse, and then, there's the love bombing and everything, and then you get around to the bottom, and then you're like, okay, I think everything's good, and then boom, it starts again. And so it develops, doesn't bond. Trauma bonding develops with a repeating pattern. So first you have abuse or mistreatment. And it can be emotional, it can be physical, it can be psychological in any of the forms that I've talked about, right? The criticism, the gaslighting, the emotional manipulation, guilt tripping, raging, all of those things. And so we have the abuse or the mistreatment. So that was kind of like at the top of the circle I was talking about. Then there's reconciliation and or affection. So then you're like, oh, so there's the intermittent reward that happens. The abuser shows kindness, remorse, love, the love bombing that happens. I'm so sorry. I can't believe I did that. If you really listen, though, you may hear, I can't believe I did that. Why did you push me that hard? Or I can't believe I did that. If you didn't say that, I wouldn't have reacted that way. I'm so sorry. There's always that little that it was you, right? Which is more gaslighting, essentially. So then you hold on to that. Okay, he or she does love me. They do feel really bad about what they did. And so you think, I'm not going to rock the boat. I'm not going to cause any problems. I'm just going to go with this. This is good right now. And you attach. And then there's confusion and dependency. So then, the victim clings to this positive moment, hoping for change. That's where codependency comes in. You're happy when they're happy. You're down when they're down. You're anxious when they're angry. You're codependent on how, if they text you, you're happy. If they don't, you're miserable. All of that's codependency, and that happens in this stage. And then the cycle repeats. So over time, this bond strengthens despite the harm, because it's that intermittent, right? The cycle creates this intermittent reinforcement. It's a powerful psychological effect where the brain becomes conditioned to seek the high of the reconciliation after the distress. So this is the way I describe trauma bonding to my clients. I will say to them, why do you think people at a casino sit at a slot machine? for hours or for a long time. And often they'll say, because they're winning. No, they're not. maybe they've won a few times. It's because it's like you pull the thing, lose, 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 lose. You start to like, oh, I'm going to give up, win. I'm going to keep going on this machine, right? And then you keep going, lose, 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 lose. Ugh, this is stupid. I'm wasting my money, win. And then you keep going. That's intermittent reinforcement. And that is, layman's term, this psychological phenomenon that is happening. It's all this abuse, and then you get this breadcrumb of affection, and you hold on to it, and you think, okay, they're changing, and you just want to feel that good. You get that high from that reconciliation, and then boom, it happens all over again until the next high. That's why we bond to that. So some common signs of trauma bonding: making excuses for the abuser's behavior. Well, they did that because I really pushed them. Well, they had a hard life. Well, you're really making excuses for that abuser's behavior. The other one, another common sign of trauma bonding, is you feel like you're unable to leave, even though you know you should. You know that it's unhealthy, but you're unable to break away from it. You're unable to leave it. Believing the abuse is your fault. That's a huge one. Well, I shouldn't have done that. I need to be more, fill in the blank. I need to be less, fill in the blank. How people treat us has everything to do with them and nothing to do with us. I need you to believe that, unless you're narcissistic. But in these situations, right? However, even at that, someone who is narcissistic may not be treated badly because the other person's afraid, or the other person just kind of gets in that cycle. So they may not experience that. Feeling grateful for rare moments of kindness. Narcissistic person in your relationship is kind, and you're so grateful for that moment. I can't believe they just said that to me. I can't believe they just did that for me, right? That's bare minimum. Isolating from friends or family to protect the relationship. Huge. Huge. If you are noticing that you're in a relationship that your support system is pulling away, they're not pulling away, you're pushing them away. Because the person with narcissistic behavior will convince you that they're jealous of you. Because your support system will see the signs that you don't, and they'll be trying to help you and trying to guide you away from that. And the narcissist is saying they're just jealous of the relationship that we have. They're just trying to bring you down. Don't you see how they've been jealous of you always? Or if it's a parent, they just don't have parents like you do. And so they're jealous of that. Or they're just trying to come between us. They don't like me because they want you all to themselves. Whatever it may be, they convince the person that their support system is against them. And I know people are like, well, grow a backbone. Don't turn your back on your family because of another person. It's not that easy because you are stuck in this cycle. And the emotional manipulation and the gaslighting and everything creates this narrative in your brain that what that person says is true. And your support system, you do go against them. Confusing, if you start to confuse manipulation with love, you can't tell the difference between the two. That is a strong sign that there's trauma bonding happening. Again, people saying just get away from it. Why is it so hard to break the bond? There's a power imbalance. The abuser often controls key aspects of the victim's life, and there's emotional confusion that happens. So victims actually begin to internalize the abuser's perspective. They see themselves through that perspective, that the abuser, their perspective, right? So they see themselves as weak because that's how someone with grandiose narcissism thinks that they're much better and they're elite, so that others are weak. And it's better for them if their partner or their child or whomever it may be is weaker, because that really builds them up, right? And so there's that emotional confusion because maybe I am like that, but others are telling me I'm not, but maybe I am. And so you start to see yourself through that lens. And then there's fear and guilt. So leaving, depending on the spectrum of it, because I said earlier that people with NPD can become very angry and violent. So leaving may feel more dangerous or shameful than staying. So shameful because you didn't make it work, because it can't possibly be them, it's you, right? So and if you start to see yourself through that person's perspective, which is a very distorted perspective, then you're going to feel shame, because why would I leave somebody so awesome? And I am weak. I can't make it work. And in my experience, one thing that a narcissist will tell you is that nobody else will want you. And so you think, well, I better stay with them because, it's true. Like, I have all these faults. Nobody else will want me. And you believe it. They've convinced you. That's their perspective, and it's now your perspective. So then there's shame in that. I need to stay. Trauma bonding can happen in romantic relationships. It can happen in family relationships. It can happen in work relationships, friendships. And I know people, I've said that in session, and clients are like, work relationships? No. It depends on the work environment. That trauma bonding, if you have a boss that is a narcissist and you need this job and you stick with it, or they've convinced you, that other companies won't hire you, or you owe me, or whatever it may be. I can't think of a whole bunch off the top of my head. That's going to form a trauma bond. There's also cult-like environments. I'm not saying, well, cults, yes, but cult-like environments that can form this trauma bond when you have somebody in a group that is the leader type thing. I don't want to dig too deep into that because we could go down rabbit holes. That, and Lily's probably, my social media gal, is probably making a note right now. We're going to do a podcast on that because that's what she does to me. I say things and then all of a sudden I see her phone out and I know that, oh, I guess I'm doing something on that. Healing from trauma bonding often requires support, therapy. I'm not just saying that because I'm a therapist, but sometimes we need that person who's not emotionally connected, not emotionally involved, to be able to help us navigate that. And a safe place to build your self-worth. Trauma bonding. Now, I hope that people out there are like, wow, okay. Because I know a lot of people think that trauma bonding is bonding over trauma. And sometimes in sessions, people will say that. I'm like, I think you're confusing what trauma bonding is. And then I explain it and they're like, ew. Yeah, more of that's happening. I hope that you got some from that and you can really recognize it, either in a relationship now or in future relationships, so that you can get out of it before it becomes too entrenched. I know that people say, well, if you're in a narcissistic relationship, get out of it. I've just said it's not easy to do. And sometimes for whatever reason, people feel like they have to stay. I'm not just talking about romantic relationships, right? Some people might find it easier sometimes to get out of a romantic relationship. We have, narcissism in parent-child relationships. We have narcissism in sibling relationships. And usually in all different friendships, usually when it's a blood relation, clients will say, yeah, but it's my mom, or it's my dad, or it's my brother, or it's my sister. I can't leave. Why? Because they're blood. That is a perception that we have, that if it's family, we must stick. I shouldn't leave, because you shouldn't have to leave because a parent shouldn't, you shouldn't feel that way with a parent or a sibling, but it does happen and you need to protect your mental health. Am I saying that I want all families to, break down? No, of course not. But you can set those boundaries and you have to pull back sometimes from that relationship. So I wanted to just talk about, because like I said, we often say, just get out, get out, get out. Some people feel like they can't. So I want you to be equipped. You know how I always say I like my toolbox, right? My toolkit. I want you to be equipped with some strategies to manage the narcissistic relationship until you are able to get out, if that may be the case. So here's a truth. Narcissists rarely change, but you can. By doing some of these, you can build your power, or you can find your mental health again. So because managing a relationship with a narcissist can be emotionally taxing, if you have the right strategies, you can protect your well-being, all right, and better navigate the challenges that come with it. So, some approaches. Set firm boundaries. Narcissists will not respect boundaries. They will test your boundaries. They will, you draw that line in the sand and they do a triple sow cow over it. That's what I said to a client once, and they're like, what? They will do a flip right over that boundary. But you need to be clear about what is acceptable, and you need to stick to your limits. It is crucial that you are consistent with these boundaries. And I know it's scary. And I know that, the trauma bonding or the narcissistic abuse that happens with it can make it really difficult to set those boundaries. Empowering yourself by setting those boundaries and sticking with it. If they try to jump over that line in the sand, you draw another one a few feet out. Be consistent with your boundaries. Practice radical acceptance. So if you can understand that narcissists will rarely change, and that these positive behaviors of the love bombing, the affection that you're getting is probably part of their disorder or part of the cycle, you will stop hoping for the change to happen. That sounds really sad, right? That I'm going to stay in this relationship knowing that the change probably won't happen, knowing that this affection isn't real. That's sad. Remembering that this is managing the relationship, perhaps until you're at a place, a situation, through therapy, whatever it may be, that you are able to leave it. This is going to help your mental health. Also, by recognizing that all that I just said, you can put your own protective measures into place because you're not like holding on or waiting for that affection. Avoid power struggles. It is like, what I'm not saying children with children with oppositional defiant disorder are narcissistic, but what I say to parents all the time is do not argue with a child or a youth with ODD, oppositional defiant disorder, because they get fueled by that argument. And that is the same with a narcissist. If you can avoid arguing with them or trying to win the conversation or win against a narcissist, that is going to help you in the long run. They thrive on conflict and control. And so they will spin you, and you are trying to argue, and they love that conflict. So they love throwing stuff in. It gives them power. So disengage. Don't argue. Don't try to win against them. Little tidbit, if you want to win, make them think that it was their choice, right? If you want to do something, plant some seeds that they think that they made the decision or they came up with the idea. It's kind of winning. But don't argue with them. Keep interactions superficial as needed, right? When it's needed. So limit the emotional depth that you put into conversations to avoid the gaslighting, to avoid the manipulation. If you put a lot of emotional depth into the conversation, then you're opening yourself up for that emotional manipulation. So it's just, a superficial interaction. And focus on your self-care. I don't need to go into all that self-care is because I've said it over and over and over in podcasts and videos, but build your self-esteem. Take time for you. Pull out facts, how other people see you, how other people talk to you, comments that other people or compliments that other people have made. Really focus on those. Maintain an outside support system. If you are recognizing the trauma bonding characteristics and narcissistic characteristics, and I'm telling you right now, one of the main ones is separating you from your support system, isolating you, sometimes as far as moving you across the country because it's better for your relationship. That is one of the biggest ones. recognize it and maintain those supports. Your friends and family are not jealous of you. They're not trying to wreck your relationship. They're trying to help you and trying to help you see what they see. Obviously, you have free will and you make your own decisions, but try to maintain that outside support system. And prioritize your mental health. With a covert narcissist, if it's, yeah, but it's better for my mental health if we do this. If you do this for me, what is better for your mental health? They can take care of their own mental health. Try to step out of that cycle. Praise strategically. See how it can be draining? All of these things that you have to try to be one step ahead, but praise strategically. Positive reinforcement can sometimes better or encourage better behavior, but use it cautiously and only when it feels safe. Because, especially with a covert narcissist, they thrive on the victim. You may see a post that somebody just says, what a horrible day. I'm not saying always, because I know I'll get, some backlash to, but often a covert narcissist will post something like that, or I'm a terrible person, so that everyone says, no, you're a rock star, you're great, or had a bad day. Oh my goodness, what happened? And that thrives, right? So when you're giving positive encouragement, really assess what is going on in that moment. So, because you don't want to fuel it. And pick your battles. Not every issue is worth confronting. Choose wisely so that you avoid necessary arguments or that emotional drain that happens. Some of the things, as much as it could, it's frustrating and aggravating and draining and all of that, let it go. Because they want you to confront them. They want you to make it a power struggle so that they can be more powerful. You don't need that. So those are some strategies. And like I said, I get it. To have to live like that, being that one step ahead, trying to assess how to respond to things, being so careful. If you choose to stay in a relationship with a narcissist or feel that you have to, those are some strategies to help. When it's time to walk away. So when you make that decision, you are, okay, I'm done. I need to get out of this. It doesn't just mean leaving a narcissist doesn't just mean a physical separation. It is a psychological liberation. And I can, say that from personal experience as well. It's not just physically separating. The psychological liberation that you have after that is enormous. But expect grief. Expect second guessing. That's all normal because of the codependency that has occurred, because of the trauma bonding that has happened. It's normal. So expect that and work through it with time and space and support. You'll realize how far you've come. And I'm going to talk about in a little bit the moment that I was most empowered in that journey. If you are co-parenting or working with someone narcissistic, detachment, not engagement, becomes your greatest tool. Detach from that person. Don't engage with everything that they're doing. If it's co-parenting, answer questions about the kids. Use an app. I'm going to dive a little bit more into that in another podcast. But disengage. Don't detach to that person. Even if you've walked away or you're still living with or dealing with the person with narcissistic traits. Narcissistic abuse is huge and we don't talk about it enough and people don't understand it enough. So it can have effects or symptoms for years after you leave the narcissistic relationship. So I really wanted to talk about it today, and I want my viewers or my listeners to make notes so that you know what narcissistic abuse looks like. So many times in session or in my personal life talking to people, and they're saying all these things, and I'm like, that's narcissistic abuse. And they're like, what is that is symptoms of narcissistic abuse. There's actually a term that we use that I'm going to talk about too. It's not a diagnostic term, but that is what that is. And they're like, I didn't even know that was a thing. How could it not, right? But we don't talk about it enough. So I really want to talk about it here and emphasize it. So narcissistic abuse can be subtle. It is confusing, and it can be deeply damaging. It often leaves you questioning, your own reality. It leaves you questioning your sanity. Narcissistic abuse is emotional and psychological manipulation from someone with narcissistic traits or narcissistic personality disorder. And it usually follows a recognizable pattern. So I want you to pay attention to this pattern. The common signs that you may be experiencing narcissistic abuse: gaslighting. And we've talked about that. They deny your experiences, or they twist the facts. I never said that. You're losing it. And that never happened, right? That's that one form. I mentioned ghosting, withdrawing affection, stonewalling, anything that makes you doubt your reality, makes you question what. I'm sure that happened. Did I make it up? It makes you kind of spiral with that. Makes you doubt your memory or your perception. Love bombing followed by devaluation. So you're showered with affection and then you're criticized, or you're suddenly ignored. And you're like, what just happened? Usually narcissistic abuse, the best way I can describe it is you feel like you're losing your mind. And your head is spinning all the time because you're trying to like, what did that just happen? What just happened? You are questioning your sanity all the time. The constant criticism and blame shifting. So you're made to feel like everything is your fault. Everything. Even their behavior. And I said earlier, right? Even with that cycle of abuse and trauma bonding, when they say, I am so sorry, I feel horrible. Why did you do that? Why did you make me act that way? Or why did you push me? Or I am so sorry. If you just didn't do that, I wouldn't have reacted, right? So you're like, oh, they just apologized, but oh yeah, I shouldn't have done that. So you're blamed for even their choices and behaviors. Isolation. So like I said, cutting you off from friends and family, your support systems. I have had situations that just popped in my head. I have had situations with clients where their narcissistic partner or the narcissistic person in their life told them that I was gaslighting them, that I had an agenda, that I'm stupid and don't know what I'm talking about, that I'm just trying to make them look bad so that they'll leave. So many different things, or that I'm just telling them what they want to hear. And so I have to be very frank with my clients in those moments. 9 times out of 10, they tell me, right, that they've said that. And I have to say to them, okay, first of all, I gain nothing out of, your relationship. I gain nothing. Why would I tell you to leave? Or why would I, and I never tell clients what to do anyway. Sometimes when they come up with these things, it's just through our conversation. Yes, I may have some open-ended questions that gets them to like, oh, but that's my job. But so they will even try to remove the support of a therapist. So that is another sign that you're in a narcissistic abusive relationship. Walking on eggshells. This is something really common that clients say to me, where you're always feeling anxious of saying the wrong thing, doing the wrong thing, setting them off. You're constantly monitoring your words and your actions. I had a client once tell me that the dynamic with a narcissistic parent, and how this client as a child was constantly monitoring their parents' behavior to ensure that things didn't go off the rails, that this parent didn't threaten things, didn't portray, I'm trying not to breach confidentiality, that their parent did not threaten risky things of harm or danger. And as a child, this client was constantly walking on eggshells right through teen years to ensure that their siblings were not, misbehaving or too loud, or, they were the oldest. And just this constant managing, and how that impacted this person as an adult who, was seeing me as an adult. And when we started to make some connections, it was like, wow, that's walking on eggshells. And think about the psychological damage that can do to a child, to an adult. That is a sign that you're in a narcissistic abusive relationship. Passive aggressiveness or passive aggression and sabotage. So sarcasm, indirect blame, subtle undermining tactics that are very common in this. So they may not come right out and say, that's a stupid idea, but they convince you in a really subtle way that it's a stupid idea. Or, if you have, and this happened to me because I wanted to open up my own practice and I wanted to become a psychologist, and the person in my world, the narcissistic abuse, it wasn't a right out, don't do that. It was very subtle ways that it wouldn't work, or ways that I wouldn't achieve it, or things that would stand in the way of it, until the point where I convinced myself at that point that, okay, yeah, maybe I won't go to school for that then. So it can be that subtle. That is narcissistic abuse. Because if I had have done what I was going to do right away, in his eyes, I would have been better. And there's no way that would ever happen. The emotional impact of narcissistic abuse: anxiety, depression, other mental health issues, low self-esteem, feeling confused or crazy. The number of times clients that are in narcissistic abusive relationships say to me, am I crazy? I feel like I'm going crazy. I feel like I'm losing my mind every day. Difficulty trusting yourself or others. You don't trust that what people are saying to you is true. You feel like they have ulterior motives, right? Everybody has an ulterior motive. They want something from me. Or if somebody tells you that you did a really good job, you think that they're just blowing smoke. They're just telling you that to make you feel good, that it's not true. There's that side of it. But then there's you don't trust anyone to keep you safe. You don't believe anything that people are saying to you. And once you get out of that narcissistic abusive relationship, that can really impact other relationships that you have. And I hear that all the time. I have a client right now going through it. And this client said to me, I don't think I'll trust anyone ever again. And this client is in their early 20s. So that's really hard. And I'm working with this person on building that self-esteem and trying to understand that not everybody is that person. Symptoms. So pay attention to this. Symptoms that you may have narcissistic abuse. It's not a formal diagnosis, but we do call narcissistic abuse narcissistic victim syndrome. But again, it's not a diagnosis. It's not a formal diagnosis. Many survivors of narcissistic abuse, so maybe not when you're right in it, could be, but afterwards, narcissistic victim syndrome. And the symptoms of narcissistic abuse can be, wide range. There's a wide range of them and spectrum of them too, but deeply disruptive. It often affects your emotional or your emotions, psychological well-being, and physical. You can have physical symptoms from it as well. Narcissistic victim syndrome is a cluster of symptoms that results from prolonged exposure to manipulation and control. So when I just described what narcissistic abuse was, you can see that prolonged exposure that you're going to have and why it could be a narcissistic victim syndrome. Some of the symptoms that you will experience or that you may be experiencing: the emotional and psychological symptoms, chronic self-doubt, You don't believe that you are capable of making any good decisions. You second guess yourself. You are constantly questioning your memory, your decisions, your worth. It is a chronic self-doubt. Anxiety and hypervigilance. So you're feeling constantly on edge. You're anticipating criticism or conflict. Like you constantly think that your boss is going to be mad at you. You constantly think that people in your life are going to, criticize something that you do. So you're preparing yourself all the time. You're always on edge, this anxiety, hypervigilance to it. Depression and hopelessness. So it comes with a sense of emotional exhaustion, that you feel trapped. So even after you leave the relationship, you can still feel trapped in this cycle. Think about what I talked about with trauma bonding. You feel trapped in it. Low self-esteem. You begin to internalize, I had mentioned earlier, their perceptions, right? But you internalize the abuser or the narcissist's negative messages about you. So not even their perception per se, but all these negative messages. You're not going to become anything. You're not smart enough. You're not pretty enough. If you were this, then this. All of these messages, you start to internalize them. So then that becomes your narrative. And that's really going to impact your self-esteem, your self-confidence, your self-worth. Confusion and brain fog. So difficulty concentrating on things, difficulty making decisions, and that is consistent with any mental health challenges, that we do get that brain fog because your prefrontal cortex is shutting off with the stress response. So it's hard to process things and focus and concentrate. Your memory's impacted. So that's a strong indicator because that the stress response, the fight or flight, is being triggered. And emotional numbness. So you just feel connected from your emotional surroundings, from your emotions or your surroundings. You just feel numb. You don't feel a lot of that joy. You don't feel connected. Your emotions are just kind of like being, right? There's also behavioral symptoms. So avoidance. We start withdrawing from social interactions. We start isolating ourselves because if you're feeling all of the emotional and psychological things I just talked about, or you create that negative narrative, you're going to isolate yourself. People pleasing. People pleasing is a narcissist's dream, right? Somebody who is over functioning, gives of themselves, says yes even when they want to say no. That is a narcissist's dream. And so overcompensating to avoid conflict or gain control, gain approval, not control. If you are trying to gain approval, if you are trying to, you don't think that you're worthy of achieving it, so you're just going to give it all to someone else, that's a behavioral symptom of narcissistic abuse, especially if that's not how you were or who you were before this relationship. If all of these things start coming up and you're like, who am I now? That is a sign of, or a symptom, behavioral symptom of narcissistic abuse or narcissistic victim syndrome. Walking on eggshells, again, it doesn't have to be with the narcissist now. If it is victim syndrome, narcissistic victim syndrome, and it's after the relationship, you may still walk on eggshells. You may still be constantly monitoring your behavior to avoid triggering the abuser if you're still in it, or other people, because you transfer that into other situations. And self-blame. So believing that the abuse is your fault, but also believing anything is your fault. I have clients who are in other relationships, or, I had one client who told me that their partner, the tap broke, and their partner said, oh, the tap's broken. And my client said, oh, I'm really sorry. And their partner looked at them and said, why are you sorry that the tap's broken? Because this client grew up with a narcissistic parent, and that parent blamed them for everything. And if something broke in the house, it was their fault. If, they unloaded the dishwasher, it wasn't done properly, and things weren't cleaned properly, it was their fault. Or unloaded, whatever it happens to be. There's also the self-blame, like believing that the abuse was your fault. that you deserved it somehow. So there's self-blame in that situation as well. This is just repetitive, but the abuse tactics or the manipulation tactics that cause these symptoms, the gaslighting, love bombing and devaluation, hoovering is a term. I've used that with a client and they're like, huh? Hoovering, think of vacuum, right? Hoovering means attempts to pull you back into the relationship after you try to leave. So a lot of times covert narcissists will be the victim. And so you're trying to leave, you're trying to get out of this relationship. And it's like they start to, if you leave, I'm going to hurt myself. If you leave, I'm going to end my life. If you leave, all of these things, I will be nothing. If you leave, I'll be all alone. All of these things that try to pull you back in. Or nobody else is going to want you. Who's going to want you? You can't do this, you can't do that. And because that narrative has become your narrative, you start to believe it and it pulls you back in. So hoovering, they do whatever they can to pull you back into the relationship. Triangulation. This is something a lot of my clients don't understand. And when I explain it, they're like, holy cow, yes. So it involves, they involve others to manipulate you. So usually what happens with triangulation, if it's a parent who is a narcissistic parent, and you have siblings, they will use the other sibling, right? So if you think of a triangle, the parent is at one point of it, and then the other 2 points down below would be your sibling and you. So what they do is, if you think of the triangle, they will praise your sibling, they will give them all that they need, they will, love bomb so that they gravitate towards them. And then you're isolated and alone. And then that sibling will start to demonstrate some of those behaviors because they want the parent's affection. That's the cycle. And you're the bad person because maybe the parent is upset with you, you stood your ground or something. Then the parent's going to do that to the sibling. So now you start to come up and form the triangle base with the parent. And the sibling is isolated. And you're going to go with it because, wow, my parent is paying attention to me and doing things with me or praising me or recognizing me, whatever it may be. So there's triangulation. One thing that people with narcissistic behaviors often do as well that is kind of a form of triangulation. And if you listen, it's very subtle. But if they are criticizing you or they're putting you down, or, they might say something like, you are so this, and I'm not the only one that thinks it. Or you are so this, and other people have said it too. I bet you if you said, could you give me 3 names and I'll check with them? They won't have 3 names because it didn't actually happen, especially if that is not within your character and that is something that they are trying to get you to feel, or they're trying to prove their point. People with narcissistic traits will rarely say, I think this, and that's the way it is. They will usually more often say, I'm not the only one that thinks it. I'm not the only one that said it. So that's a form of triangulation. And sometimes if you say, so who else said it? They may say somebody else thinking that you are too weak to ask that person. Ask that person. Okay, if they give you a name, ask the person if they said it. Now, part of the symptoms, you may not trust that the person's telling you the truth if they say they didn't, or the person might not want to tell you, but chances are they're not going to, what they're saying is not accurate. Silent treatment and passive aggression. So I said that the silent treatment is a form of gaslighting. Silent treatment is used to punish or destabilize you. They will use the silent treatment because it's control, right? You're going to be, usually what happens is you will keep coming up to them. You will be trying to, like, groveling, right? You will be trying to make things better for them. You'll be trying to establish the relationship. You will apologize even if you didn't do anything, because that silence is deafening. That silence just gets your brain going more, and they're using it to destabilize you. They're using it to gain power. The more you have to come to them, probably the longer the silence stays, because they're getting that power. If they're a covert narcissist, then they are playing the victim, and you are going to apologize for things you didn't do. You're going to do whatever they want you to do. Like I said, these symptoms can linger long after the relationship ends. So if it's been years and you're still, some of these symptoms, yeah, because depending how long you're in that relationship, but especially if it's a parent-child dynamic, that's, it's going to go long into your adulthood until you get help for that. Healing for it, though, is absolutely possible. And I treat people with narcissistic abuse all the time, and I see the change. Using some cognitive behavior therapy skills can really help change that perspective, challenge those thoughts and perspectives that the narcissist instilled in you. So obviously through therapy, there's support groups, just educating yourself on what these are, listening to podcasts like this that are explaining what it is and what to look for. That can help you rebuild your sense of self, right? Your sense of self-worth. Navigating a relationship with a narcissist is not about outsmarting them. It's about reconnecting to yourself. You are allowed to protect your energy. You're allowed to stop shrinking to make someone else feel bigger, better, more powerful. You are not weak. You are not stupid. I just want to share before we end a little story about a client that I have who is 20 years old, and this person is a rock star. And this person was in and out of a narcissistic abusive relationship throughout their teens, and is finally out of it and not wanting to go back. And this person in a session recently said to me that they are stupid for ever being in that relationship, that they're weak, that they're disgusted with themselves. Like, the self-deprecating talk was like, it was a lot. And I know this client well enough to know we've had, this person's been in therapy for a few years, since this person was like 16. So I know the relationship, so I know I could ask this and not put this person on the spot. And I said, do you think that I'm weak? And the client said, no, I think you're one of the strongest people that I know. And I said, do you think that I'm stupid? And the client said, no, you're like the smartest person that I know. And then I said, do you believe that I was in a narcissistic abusive relationship when I was your age, and before and after that age? And this client said, I'm not going to give total details, but did not believe that I could be in that relationship. Now, that was years ago, but my story that, I've talked about in other podcasts about being in an abusive relationship. It was a narcissistically abusive relationship. And I was told so many things, that I was not good enough, that nobody else would want me, that I was not pretty enough, that I was not smart enough, whatever it may be. And that kept me with that person. I even heard this person say to a friend, I don't want her, but I don't want anyone else to have her. And in that warped sense of reality that I was in, that cycle at, I think I was 19 years old then, I was like, oh, he doesn't want anyone else to have me. He just wants me. No, right? But that's the cycle that I was in. That's what this narcissistic abuse and trauma bonding does to a person, the codependency. And I'm not going to tell all the details of it, but one of the most, and I shared this with this client, instead of looking at it as, I'm stupid, I'm weak, I can't believe I did that, understanding what all of this is, all this narcissistic abuse and trauma bonding, but also empowering yourself. And this went on for years, and we had a child, and I remember, and I will never forget, the moment that I felt so empowered, and it was the turning point for me. And I had left. We separated, and there was a bit of an argument, and he told me that he will not pay child support. He will not help out with anything, and I will not get things from him. That I will not, basically child support was me draining him and that kind of thing. And I remember looking at him and something switched in me, and maybe it was because he was talking about, not providing for my child, and Mama Bear came out, but I looked at him and I said, I can't make you give child support. I'm trying with a lawyer to get you to pay child support. I can't make you do that, but you will not win because I am smarter than you and I'm a better person than you. And at first I was like, whoa, that just came out of my mouth. And then he looked at me with shock. Like, I think his mouth actually dropped open. But then there was rage. How dare I talk to him like that? And I just walked over and opened up the front door and said, leave. And he did. And I kind of stepped back because I was a bit afraid because he was very angry. And he slammed the door. And then I stood there and I was like, holy crap. And I started to cry, but then I was like, I just did that. And from that moment on, there was still stuff that, because we did have a child for years after, but not like that. I didn't allow him to have that power over me. There was still residual narcissistic abuse and narcissistic victim syndrome stuff. And still today, some things come up in my mind, but he didn't have that power over me anymore. And funny story that I shared with Lily when I came in. On my drive here, it's only about a 1-minute drive here, but I was thinking about that story. I was thinking about, how ending the podcast with that story to empower people and say, look at me now, right? Look at me and what I've accomplished. He told me through subtle ways that I would never have my own practice, that I would never be a business owner, that I would never be doing this. We didn't have podcasts and stuff back then, but if he was here, he would be convincing me that I would never be doing this, and I'm doing it all. And I was thinking about all of that, and Cher's Strong Enough came on the radio. And at first I was just kind of singing along. Then I was like, thank you, universe, right? It was like the universe said, and if you listen to the lyrics to that song, it's like perfect. So yes, you can get through narcissistic abuse. You can get past what narcissist has done to you. You need to identify it. I didn't know that's what it was when I was going through it. I wasn't doing what I'm doing now. If you're listening right now and you feel seen, good. If this has resonated with you, good. That is your first step to freedom. That is your first step to understanding. This is not your fault. You are not to blame. I want you to feel seen and heard because your story matters. And it deserves respect, even if nobody else or other people have refused to give it to you. So, going to wrap up on that note. We are going to do some follow-up podcasts because narcissism, we talk in here as therapists, and narcissism right now is huge. More in the last couple of years talking about it, but I think it's becoming more prevalent, like the term. We're going to do follow-up podcasts. So one is going to be co-parenting with a narcissist and is going to focus solely on that. The other, and this one is huge right now, is adult children of narcissistic parents. So we're going to focus solely on that. So watch for those coming up in the next few weeks, and follow us on Spotify. And if you're watching us on YouTube, subscribe to our channel, share, like, comment. If there are any podcasts or information that you think you would like to hear about, please shoot us a DM or let us know, comment, and we will work that into our podcast schedule because I want to help other people. All right. Take care of you.